I would like to remind you that for more Microsoft webcasts, you can go to microsoft.com/webcast. Thanks again for joining us for today's presentation, Project 2010 Solution Starters Drill Down and Code Walkthrough, Part 2 of 4. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Mike Shagru. Mike, you now have the floor.
Thanks, Heather. Welcome, everyone, to Part 2 of our four-part series. Next two parts, just so you know, are going to be next week, Tuesday and Thursday, same time. So today, we're going to cover what we call the solution starters. And last Tuesday, we covered bulk edit and bulk import on these solution starters. Today, we're going to cover the EPT export, import, and association tools. So let me back up a little bit. First of all, there may be some people on that aren't familiar with what the solution starters are, but basically, in the project server world, or in the project world, there are certain maybe gaps or maybe deficiencies that through the course of many versions we find that customers want to do certain things with the product that aren't standard out-of-the-box features. So the team internally at Redmond has come up with these solution starters, and here's the list of them, that do useful things, and they're also nice demonstrations in terms of development techniques for developers when you want to do customizations in either Project Server and or SharePoint. So really, these are useful, but the focus today is on developers and going through the code and seeing how we did certain things, and hopefully these will be either good starting points for people if they're going to do custom development, or at least give you some sample code techniques to use this stuff to build your own customizations in the future. One other thing to mention, these solution starters are not supported code. They're just a sample code. It's downloadable from Code Gallery, and that link will be on the last slide when we're finished. So just to make sure you know, this is not supported stuff. So in today's webcast, we're going to cover three of the solution starters that are all related: demand management, export, import, and then the association tool. This is developer focused, so if you're on the call and not a developer or not interested in that sort of thing, this is probably not the call to be on. This will be a code walkthrough for the most part. There'll be a lot of the C#, JavaScript, you'll see Visual Studio, and you'll have to know probably some basic things about development with SharePoint and Project Server, et cetera. So that's definitely the audience for this thing today. Let's get kicked off here with the first one. The first of the three, Demand Management Export Tool. It's a WinForms application that exports all demand management information as a feature. So what's significant about this is demand management is really another name for our workflow that's built into Project. And there are elements to the workflow. So aside from the workflow itself, the DLLs that you may use or may develop in Visual Studio, there are also components that are part of Project. And those are things called EPTs, which are Enterprise Project Templates. There are phases, stages. There are PDPs, custom fields, and lookup tables. That's sort of the hierarchy of the elements that are used in demand management. And so the purpose of this tool really is to be able to export one or more EPTs and all their associated sub-objects, which would be phases and stages and so forth. The idea is to be able to export those as a feature, as a SharePoint feature, and then be able to import it back in to another site or maybe a customer site or somewhere else that you want to basically have those elements that you've created. So this tool is somewhat similar to something else you may be familiar with called Playbooks, which is focused a little bit differently. Playbooks is really sort of the Uber tool that just exports, I think, pretty much everything, all your settings pretty much from a Project Server instance, and then you can take those and then re-import them on another instance. So that's very useful for instance, if you have a development environment and you want to take the settings and then move it to your test and your production environments, or vice versa. You do something like Playbooks to get all the stuff. However, if you are, say, a partner and you've developed some kind of a a special workflow that's, a custom workflow or something else that you want to export and be able to provide as a feature that can be installed on its own, this export tool is more focused on that type of functionality. So that's really what this is aimed at. So let me go right into this. We'll start off with just sort of a step through of how this actually works. Let me switch over. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to start off with the debugger turned off. Everything's disabled already. So let's go ahead. I'll just run this one off the desktop. So this is the WinForms app. We just started. In fact, this comes with an installer. There is, if you download this, you'll see in the deployment folder there's an MSI file that deploys this into your program files directly. So it's pretty straightforward. First thing that comes up when you start it is this URL. You obviously have to point it at your server instance, so we'll go ahead and do that. And now this thing's going to go out and using the PSI and also using some SharePoint APIs, it's going to go out and it's going to read in all those elements that we just talked about, the enterprise project templates, the phases, the stages, PDPs, custom fields, lookup tables. Those things will all be pulled in. And we'll be able to see here in the tree in a minute when that's done, the elements that we can now sort of check and decide which ones we want to export. And I'll show you how that works. And it's going to export those out into some XML files. And so that's really the purpose of the export tool. The next step after this piece, the next solution starter is the import side, which is the opposite. And I'll just jump ahead a little bit to give you some context. The import tool then takes the XML files that are generated from this and sort of on the fly builds a feature with those elements and then allows you to pull those into another instance. So it's sort of the export-import pairing here. So this is done. And you can see here now that we've got basically just the tree view. And you can see there's a list of all the existing EPTs in my instance that I just put in the dialog box. So if you went and looked in server settings under EPTs, you would see the exact same one. So it used the PSI, pulled all that stuff out. Same thing with phases and stages. So they're all here. And you'll notice, let me come back, close this up a little bit so you can see it better. If I come in here and say check all the EPTs, you'll see that it's sort of with this autocomplete enabled up here on the top. It's going to go out and it knows, depending on the type of an EPT or the type of if it's either workflow controlled or not, it's going to select basically the stuff that's related to it. So typically, and the reason all of those are checked is because I have some that are controlled by workflow, and I'll explain that in a minute. So let me just pick one EPT so you can see what it does. You'll notice here that I picked the one basic project plan, and it only has just these PDPs associated with it. There are no custom fields and no lookup tables associated with it. Let's try another one. That one doesn't have any. So you can see here as we go clicking through these different things will be highlighted. Now this is an interesting one because typically phases and stages are not they're not associated because those are actually things that are associated on the workflow side, which is in a DLL. So there's really no way to sort of connect that directly. However, if we have done something in our EPT association tool, which I'm going to show you the third piece of this today, if that tool is installed and we've made some associations with phases and stages, then when I click on it, new EPT, it will highlight the phases and the stages that are being used by that EPT. And I'll show you how that's stored and when we get to that point on the third part of this. So in any event, these are basically the associations that we're going to export with this tool. So let me go ahead and unselect all these. And then just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to just pick my new EPT since it already has these other phases and stages set up for me. So we're going to select that. We just want to give that feature to our customers with our new workflow, and we want to call this thing Mike's new, call it my smooth feature. And then we're going to browse this folder I already have. I'll go ahead and export it. And so this thing now is going out, spinning through all these entities and creating XML files, and I'll show you those in a minute. So it's complete. So let's go over to that folder. Here it is on my desktop. And you can see there's a whole bunch of XML files here that were generated by the tool. So these are just the entities basically that I selected, and this is all the data that's needed to import this back on another instance. So you can see here we have custom fields, we have features. Features is not one of them, sorry, there's some other stuff in here. Look at tables, subparts, EPTs, phases, and stages. Those are the main ones. And then the site collection file is actually a CMP file, which is more it's not XML, it's a SharePoint file that basically is backing up because the PDPs are stored in a list. So that list is stored off in the CMP file. So it's basically done using a SharePoint API. And so that's basically what happens. And then there's this whole controlling file here called entities. And this is sort of the file that we initially used to tell us what things were exported when we do the import. We know what to grab. So those are the files you'll see when you drop it out. So let me just leave it at that for the time being. We'll run through the import side of this and the second part. Let's do a quick walkthrough in the code. So I've already got it loaded here in Visual Studio. I'll just give you some idea of what's going on and how this stuff's laid out. So there's several projects in here. There's VM Export, which is the WinForm app. There's a library where all the real work is done. That's a separate project. And then we've got a test library, a test project, which I'm not going to talk about today. That's just some testing stuff. And then I added this EPT library, which is part of the association tool that this uses, so that if we're debugging, we can go and look at this. But it's normally not part of this project. So I guess the first significant file here is, your normal form file that runs the main app. And, what you would expect, it's going to have basically just some code to handle the buttons that we click on here. So we're going to walk through this in a minute with in the debugger just to show you what's going on quickly. So that's the main guy where you're going to start off. The form PWA select file is just that dialog that comes up that allows you to enter the PWA URL. Nothing special there. And then form result is just another minor dialog that pops up. So that's pretty lightweight in that project. So as I mentioned, the real work is now happening down in this export library. So let's take a look at this. In the entities folder, we've got two of them. We've got dependency and the entity type. Dependency is, this is used to construct our object dependency graph. So what really happens is you've got the UI, which is a tree view, and then sort of attached to it in some of the tags of the tree view are these dependency items that basically build the tree of, the EPTs with the phases and stages and all the way down that graph. That's basically what what this file implements to the classes to store that information. And then the entity type, this is a simple one. It's just an enumeration of the different entities that we store. Nothing too special there. Got a few helpers over here in the helper folder. This collection helper one is really just it's a simple one too. It just performs an action on every object in a collection. So, in LINQ I can run through and iterate through a collection of stuff and have it perform some kind of any method I want, basically. Enumeration helper just returns this description of the enumerations you saw in the entity type. Not much going on there. And then the tree helper, this is a bunch of static utility methods that just let us manipulate nodes in our tree view that you saw in the main form there. That's what this is used for. And then the real bulk of this tool is down in the services folder, and you'll see these files that start with the I data service, I dependency, etc. These are the interface definitions, so they're pretty lightweight. However, in the IMPL files folder, these are the service implementation. So this is really the real work is done. So we've got here the data service, and this is, you can see here from some of these methods, this is really where a lot of the dependency stuff is being worked on. I've got breakpoints in here. We're going to walk through this in a few minutes. Dependency service also, data service wraps up some of the data. So this is sort of like a common container for all the different data that we're going to manage. Dependency service is the one that actually builds our dependency graph. The EPT association service, this is a service that goes out and can look at our EPTs that are controlled by workflows and figure out, what the dependencies are. So that one I showed you where I checked the EPT, the new EPT, and it brought in the phases and the stages, that's because I'd already defined it over in the dependency tool. So this EPT association service is really that sort of that interface over to the data that the dependency tool left and allows me to go over and figure out, if the workflow is controlled and get the dependencies as required. So that's a pretty important service. And then the final one here is the PSI service. And this pretty much is just a wrapper for our, different workflow, custom table, and lookup table PSI calls. It's a little bit misleading, though, because down at the end there's also an additional call, which actually is using the SharePoint API to get the PDP list. And that's obviously not a PSI call. It's just a SharePoint API call. So, but basically, sort of all the API calls are bundled down in this PSI service. Let's see, anything else? SP adapter. So these are just sort of, the SP adapters are just sort of wrapper classes for different types of SharePoint entities. So that makes it easier to manipulate and list and sort of associate data with SharePoint entities. And then finally, the tree builder. The tree builder file you see here is kind of the main driver for managing the UI and building that tree that we saw. So you can see here there's a method called load tree, which we'll walk through, and basically uses all the services that we just talked about to basically go out and figure out, populate the tree, and put the right things in the tree based upon the dependencies. So that's kind of a quick walkthrough on this guy. Let's take a quick spin in the debugger. Let me enable the breakpoint. Okay, so there's basically two things happening in here. One is the load DM, load demand management method, which when we start up, this guy goes out and he uses the tree builder module that we just talked about, goes down and loads the tree, and basically making a bunch of PSI calls in here. So you can see here, we talked about these. These are all the different services. So our data service has the kind of wraps the PDPs. You could grab that stuff for us. Basically, then we go out and retrieve all the other ones too, the EPTs, the phases. I'm going to just walk past those. I think it's all. Here we go. We had a break down inside the PSI service. You can see here, this is where we're going out and getting that PDP list. So we're just going to do a little bit of SharePoint navigation. We go to the site, and then we look through the lists hanging off the site, and when we find the one that matches the UID that we have here, then we basically return that list. So it's just a walk down through the API, pretty simple. And we need that list in order to see what the PDPs are. So let's go past that. Now we're going to go out and do our PSI calls, get the EPTs. And that's off making the call right now into the server. And we'll just return our standard data that we would expect back from a PSI call. Same thing on the phases, stages, etc. So let me just skip down to next breakpoint. So now we got these data sets back that we're going to sort of normalize into some more generic lists that'll be easier for us to manage. So we're merging these data sets all together into one data set. We've got some disparate ones out there, right? So we merge all those, and now we're actually going to spin through and start creating our parent node and EPTs. Let's just step into this one, but it's kind of the same for all the different nodes. So if you've done any tree view stuff, you know how this works. So here we're going out and getting our enumeration description. We looked at this, a pretty simple thing. Now we're out here looking for the dependencies on the EPTs. So the first thing we do is, again, this is that dependency I'm looking at. The association tool is here. So we want to check if it's installed. If it's installed, we're going to come down to this point here, and then we're going to go out and we're going to basically really read some information from a SharePoint list that stores the relationship between an EPT, the phases, and the stages. Because normally that stuff in a controlled workflow, that stuff is going to be stored. That's really part of the workflow DLL. If you've built any workflows in demand management for project, when you build the workflows, some of the activities that we use to build our workflow are tied to both stages and custom fields. So we need to use the GUIDs from those to tie those together. But unfortunately, in order to make the tool really understand that, we would have to go out and track the DLL open and do some parsing and poking around, and it's actually a lot of work, and so that's not going to happen in this version of the tool for sure. So we have to manually map that stuff over in the association tool. So if that stuff is mapped manually, it's going to get read out of the SharePoint list, and that's what's happening here. So we've detected that the tool is indeed installed, and you can see right here, we're checking that. So what happens here in this little piece of code, we're checking if the workflows is controlled. This first get by EPDUID, this is going out and checking that list. This is the list name right here, actually. If you go out and look in PWA down under list, you'll see this list, and it has some data down there. So normally it's going to look there. If the thing is not controlled by workflow, then it'll basically return null, and you'll go down to the second one where the breakpoint is, and that's going to return stuff that's read out of from the PSI. So that's what's going on. And then we're just filling up some data structures and so forth. So this is pretty straightforward. This is the easiest of the three tools, and probably the least interesting, I guess, at least from my perspective. So I'm going to kind of motor ahead here. I don't want to get too far behind in this stuff. So we'll take this break off and let it run through. Same thing. So we're checking either our list first, or we're going to go out and use the workflow service to get it, one or the other. And so that's what's happening here as we build the list. And now we're going to go out and get those workflow dependencies, right? So this is going to be the stuff we read out of the list. And you can see this is in the EPT association service. So again, this is where this service knows how to go out and read that list that we set up in the association tool and get that information out for us to display in the tree. So that's what's going on there. Now we're back in the PSI, and we're going to get all the other non-workflow controlled EPTs and all the other information. So we'll just go through that. Hopefully this thing pops up here. There it is. Okay, so you can see there's other code here in the PSI. This is doing the same thing. We're going out and reading EPT, the phases and stages and all the other pieces of this thing. So it's going to switch to one. It's either going to go off in the EPT association and read it from our list, or it's going to go through the PSI and read it out of the database and project server, one of the two. So anyway, this is it, and then we basically now have created our nodes for the EPTs, and it's going to do pretty much the same thing for everything else. This is kind of the same deal, kind of traversing through the tree. I'm going to just continue on here. I'm pretty sure everybody knows how this works. Same deal, same pattern. And so now we've gone off too, and we've gotten the PDPs, which came out of the list. And now we're at the custom fields, building that part of the tree. And now we're back in the data service, and this is where we're starting to build that dependency graph of how these items are related to each other. So that's what's going on here. And then, so now we're displayed, right? So this is back where we were from when we demoed. So let me go ahead and check this one again. And you can see here there's some stuff going on when we have this event that fires in the tree view, that after a check occurs, it comes out, and this is where we figure out, you know, where the dependencies are on the item below it, and then it goes out and figures out what things to check that are related. So I am going to zip past this. I think you can walk through that in the debugger if you're really interested. That's pretty straightforward. So we've got this checked. We've got all these things turned on automatically for us, which is really nice. So if you had to do all this, you know, manually and go back and forth through the service settings and figure all this stuff out, it would take a lot of time. So this tool, just in and of itself right now, because of the auto-complete feature, really can save you a lot of time in terms of knowing the relationships between all these parts for your workflows. So I'm going to go through now and do the export again, and this time we'll hit some breakpoints, and we'll make those pretty fast as well. So now we're in the export function. It's setting up some background worker thread, but it's not much there. And then here's where the actual real meat of it works, is in this export process. So we're out in our data storage, and we're checking. First of all, it checks for errors. There are certain situations where certain things aren't consistent, and so if there are, this will go out and extract any of the errors that might have happened while this tree was being built, and we'll get those errors. And then from there, it's just going to be basically exporting the stuff that's been captured in the tree and putting it out into those XML files, and that's what's going to happen here. We're going to work through all these different data sets, grabbing stuff, and you can see here there's a PSI call. So we're reading the enterprise project types, making the PSI call, and we're grabbing all that information. So basically just going to return that data set from the call. Same thing's going to happen for all these other ones. And then once we've retrieved all that data, now we're basically just going to sit here now, and we're going to take all these and write them out to XML files, the ones I just showed you. So that's where this happens. And then we're pretty much done. And of course, there's the PDP list. So this is the export PDP's code. And again, it's just walking through this list of things to export here. And then this is an interesting one though, because this is the one that generates the CMP file, which uses, you know, SharePoint. It's a SharePoint backup, basically. So you go through here, and you set up this SP export settings, which is really part of SharePoint's namespace. And we set up we add the objects to it, so that's going to be all the PDPs getting added to the export objects. And then we set some other settings here. You can see just some other things we need to know. And then basically we call this export run, which is another SharePoint deployment method that we can use, and this is going to generate the CMP for us. So this is the one kind of exception to things. Everything else is pretty much done with data sets. So I'm just going to go through the rest here. I don't know that it's all super interesting to see the rest of this. It's just going to be exporting. This is exporting the web parts. So you can see here we're just dumping this stuff out, these attributes for the web parts, and you can see all this stuff in the XML file if you want to crack them open. So that's what's going on there. And so now we're done. So that's a pretty quick walkthrough on the export. That's, like I said, the easiest one. It's a WinForm app. It's pretty easy to walk through and see what's going on. But the end result is we've got a bunch of XML files that we now can import. So let me go right away now to the import. Let's go back to the slides here quickly. Just give you a quick rundown on the import. So second of our three. So we've done the export walkthrough. There we go. So the next one now is demand management import. So this is a feature receiver that installs the stuff we just exported, those XML files and the CMP file. That data basically is going to get pulled in now to another instance to basically pull in all those entities that we're interested in. So this is really cool. It makes it easy to deploy these demand management objects, right, between different environments and send your customers, as I said before, or whatever. So this is pretty cool stuff. It's sort of a high-level overview of how this works is basically there is I'll show you this in a minute, there is a PowerShell script that runs, and we're going to step through it. And what it does is it goes out, looks at the XML file that we just created, and it creates a sort of a feature on the fly. It takes a sort of a featured template and then stuffs in all the different elements and things that we need for this feature, and then builds this thing, and then it can install it in the farm. So it'll install it, and then it's just sitting there, but it's not activated yet. And then in step two, when we do the activate, the feature receiver then does some things with the activate, and it basically then uses APIs and whatnot to read the XML and send the stuff in through the PSI into our new project server instance. So that's kind of at a high level what's happening here. So it's pretty clever. I think this is pretty nice. So yeah, what are we doing? So it allows us, what's a feature receiver? I don't know if everybody knows what a feature receiver is, but it's a SharePoint technique. So it allows you to run some programmatic code when you're either activating or deactivating or installing or uninstalling a feature. So when you can have, basically it's a custom handler that when one of these events happens, you can have it do something else, and that's exactly what we're going to do with this. I think I just mentioned what this does, so we'll skip right past that, and we'll just go right into the demo. So I have the PowerShell here loaded up. I have a PowerShell script, and it's called Feature Installer PS1, right? So let me just let's go ahead and run this thing. I think I've already got it. Actually, let me run it uninstalled first. I think I've already got it installed, and I want to make it fresh here. Let's run this guy first. Okay, it's uninstalled. So let's run this guy now. So let's hit the debugger. So you'll notice here the first thing is this the red text is an error, but basically what's happened is on the very first line of code up here, the snap-in, it's already been loaded, so it's just telling me it's there, and I don't need to load it again. So that's nothing to really worry about. So let's continue on. So our PowerShell now is going to go down. We're going to set up a bunch of variables. We need different paths to things, names, and stuff like that. And I've hard-coded mine. It's called Mike's New Feature, as you guys saw. So you typically would want to probably pass these in as arguments to make this, a more generic function. But for speed here, that's the way it's done. So here's where the interesting stuff happens. So in PowerShell, I go ahead and create this new XML object. I load in this XML, which I'll show you what that says. You can see here it's that entities XML file. Remember I showed you in our output, this is sort of the starting point for figuring out what entities are getting imported. That's the one that links everything else together. So we're going to load this in PowerShell, and then we're going to extract some stuff out. So the first thing is we got the feature name, right? We typed in the feature name when we were in the export tool. Well, going through that gets dumped into this entities XML file. And in fact, if you look at the feature name, it's going to be Mike's new feature. So then we do some other cleanup, which we don't really need in this particular case. Now we're going to load up this template object. So this is like a feature template. It's sort of an empty XML file, and we're going to load it up, and then we're going to put in the feature name, the description. We need a GIF that we use. There's any of the sort of the elements that we need filled in. They're going to be filled here. So this is where we actually build the feature XML on the fly with this. It's kind of a handy little thing to be able to do other things with as well. And then at the end here, we're going to save it. So now we've just saved out the template to our feature file. So that's great. Now the final thing is, then we're going to go down under our normal this path, the template, this path where all the templates are stored, where the features get installed in SharePoint. So we're going to go down and manually copy all these files now. So we're copying the XML file, which is the feature file. You can see here it's under features and then feature name, so that's where it's going to get copied to. This is the XML file we just generated. We're also going to copy that CMP file, which contains our PDP list. And then we're going to copy that image, the GIF file, down into our images directory down there, same area. And then the final step here is I'm actually going to install the feature on the farm. So this is going to be installed at the farm level, so all of my instances will be able to see this feature. So at this point now we're done. You can see we've just gone through and installed the thing. And in fact, let me pull up. I'm going to do this in, I have another instance, PWA3. So this one, if I refresh, we'll see this again because I uninstalled and reinstalled. So here's our feature right here. So at this point, nothing's happened. In other words, if I go over to my server setting and I look at my EPT, there's two. These two basically come with an empty installation. So this is what you would expect to see. There's really not much going on there. However, if I go back and activate this thing, you'll see that we'll add some, and we're going to walk through that. Let's go ahead here. Let's activate this guy. So right now what's happening when I press activate, it's actually activating the feature. The feature receiver is getting called, and the activate handler is now going through, reading in some of the files that we copied down, and it's basically pulling in all that information you saw in the XML files, using the PSIs, and basically pushing those elements now back up into the project server. So now we've got those entities. So if we go back now and look at our EPTs again, you will see that we've got an extra one. And there's the one that we exported, right? So it worked. Perfect. And if you go and look at the other stages and phases were already created, so they'll be the same. There'll be nothing new there. Custom fields in the PDPs, I think, were all standard. So for the purposes of this sample, we really only had to bring over just the EPT. But it'll bring over all those pieces if they don't exist. So that's the demo. Let me get this set up again for the debugger now. And by the way, when you're doing deactivate, the deactivate feature receiver kicks off, and it goes out and tries to pull out things that it put in. So this will basically uninstall the stuff that you put in if you deactivate. So right now when I click this, it's going out and doing basically the opposite. And now you can see it's deactivated. So just to show you that it works round trip, we go back to our APTs, we'll be back to 2, and there we go. So that worked. Okay. So let's go into the code here real quick. spin through on this stuff and talk about some of the interesting things here. We just have the one project, VM import, is all we really talk about. The test is not something that's super interesting. Let's look at the entities folder. So we have this thing called context entities, and this basically manages, this is sort of the collection of all the data. So this is sort of the collection of all the different entities we use to import. So it's sort of the starting point when you want to go down and look at my collections of EPTs and PDPs and all the other sort of collections of things. It's a collection of collections, basically. We've got the helpers. We've got a collection helper. And this is a simple one, too. This is basically, again, used to just loop through each item in the collection and execute some action on it. So this is just used for some of our link stuff. Naming helper, this generates entity names. So this is pretty simple. Just goes out and tries to generate new unique names if we need them. Here's where all the guts are, just like we had in the previous model. Down under our services folder, we have a bunch of interface files, which just define the interfaces, and then we've got the implementations. So let me just talk about these implementations a little bit. The import context CS, this manages the data for feature entities. So this is where we do the import for all the different entities, basically, right there. This is sort of the high-level import context. Within that, we've got the import custom fields. We've got the import lookup tables. These are both services that do those specific functions. They handle the importing of either custom fields or lookup tables, and they're sort of wrapped up under the import context, or import service, actually. Import service, this implements sort of, so this is the high-level guy. This is the high-level import guy that sort of sits on top of all these low-level import services. So he's the one that calls custom and lookup and workflow, et cetera. So the next one here is import workflow. He basically is going to wrap all of the PSI calls that call the workflow web service. So that's going to be workflow phases, workflow stages in the EPT. Those are the three pieces that would be handled here. Log service, this is just our service that handles logging for informational purposes. And we've got the PDP import service. This implements our main PDP import function. This is the one that knows how to read the PDPs. And then we got the PDP list service, which provides services to talk directly to that PDP list that we looked at before. And we have the PSI service. This guy does some other PSI calls. You can see some other workflow stuff going on in here. And then there's also some of these are also SharePoint APIs as well. So basically all the retrieval and the retrieval methods are all scattered within these services here. The site change service, this guy sort of goes out and manages that. So there's a document library, as I mentioned before, where we store PDP information. This is the service that goes out and handles that. And you can see here, again, we're just sort of navigating with SharePoint APIs. We go to the site, and then we open a web, and then we go through, and actually we're looking at files here, and we're streaming out these files and doing things. So that's where that happens. This is all for PDP stuff down in those document libraries, basically. There's a temp storage service, and this guy basically just goes out and creates a temp files for us that we need for some of the processing we're doing. And then the final one here is web part service. This guy manages basically, importing web parts, which is the lowest, actually not the lowest level, custom fields are the lowest, but this is one of the lower level constructs that we need to worry about. So this is where really the guts of things are happening right here in these services. The top level guy, though, is this feature receiver, and this is sort of where you'll set things to get started if you're going to walk through this in the debugger. So you can see here, we derived this thing from SP feature receiver. So we've got our feature receiver class. and we're going to override two different methods, right? We're going to look for when a feature is activated here, and then we're going to look for when a feature is deactivated here. And so basically in the activation one, this is where we go out, set up our services, we read the stuff in from the XML, and we basically push it into the appropriate places in PSI or whatever. And sort of the flip side of that is the deactivating one, and it's the same idea. When I just hit the deactivate, you just saw me demo that. When I hit that button to deactivate, it's going to call this feature receiver, and it's going to come through and just sort of back everything back out. So let me go through, let me get this guy attached here. We'll attach this guy to our processes, and then we'll just step to this guy in the debugger so you can see what's going on here. So we're attached up now. And let's see. Let's go back in here. Site settings. We'll look at our features, and we have to activate. So now we hit the activate button. We should go into that feature, and there we are. So let's walk through this. We're going to get the usual stuff. We need the server URL, the path, which is down to our feature, down under SharePoint's directory. Going to set up some services that we need. And then you can see our import services. Like I said, this is sort of the aggregating service of all the other lower-level services. So the import service uses these three to basically go out and do its thing. So we've instantiated our import service, and now we're going to run. So this is where the work actually happens. So you can see here in our run, we're basically going to do some load up these data sets. So we have the custom fields, the lookup tables, the EPT stages and phases, all our data sets for the PSI. They're just going to get loaded up with our XML files that we have been pushed down under that directory. So now our data is loaded. And now we start to call the individual services to do things. So the first thing we're going to do is import these PDPs. Let's see what's going on here. So there's our CMP file. This is sort of our special case that we're using. This is our SharePoint backup mechanism. So we get that CMP file. We make sure it exists. And then basically we come down here and inside of this, we're going to basically sort of extract this thing and basically extract out all of the PDPs out of this CMP file. So that's what's going on here in this little piece of code right here. So we're going back through that SP object list that we had stored all the items in the first place. So now we're just sort of backing out of this. We're basically extracting that stuff back out. And we're going to loop through all those objects and do some manipulations on them with this little case, the switch statement. And now we're doing some other sort of bookkeeping here with overwriting this manifest file. Little reflection there. And then let's go out of this. Okay, we don't really care about the error. Okay, so this is, now we're using our site change service, and we're actually going to add these created PDPs, and we're going to add those back into the PDP list. So that's what's going to happen here in this service. So we'll step into this guy. I think I have a break in there, I hope. So you can see we have two PDPs. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look at that just for fun. Yeah, we have a risk evaluation and a cost-benefit PDP. So that just took care of our PDP. So what we just did there, we just extracted that information out of the CMP file and we stuffed it into a SharePoint list on our PWA3 instance here, right? So that's done. Now we're going to do sort of the standard stuff, and we're going to start from the lowest level and work our way up to. So we're going to start with web parts, and we're going to go through this web part service and do the same thing. We're going to just basically suck in this XML file and pull this stuff in. Let me just get to the, maybe there's an interesting point here. Let's see. You can see here where it's extracting all the files that we had generated, and I'm trying to find the place where we put that into. Right, so we just basically added our web parts here. I'm going to go through that. Now we're going to do our lookup tables. And you can see here in PSI, we're going to check out the lookup tables. So this is our list of, these are the GUIDs of the lookup tables we need to check out first before we can do anything. And now we're basically just going to come down here. We're going to use our lookup table service, and it's going to basically update those lookup tables using PSI. And the same thing will happen here with the custom fields. I'm not going to belabor the point too much here. It's kind of the same pattern, but it's going to go through and extract stuff out of XML and then use the PSI to make some updates. And then we're finally now to stages and phases. So we're kind of working our way up the hierarchy. And we're finally now at EPTs. We're at the top level. And for instance, we should okay, so there's our, so we're looping through the EPTs and we're just doing our updates here. And that's what's going on. See if there's anything interesting in this row. Yeah, so this is just your normal, if you look in the project SDK, you'd see the definitions for all this stuff. But here it is, here's a new APT, that's the one we imported, so that makes sense. And then this is actually pulling some stuff out of a temp file and pushing it up to the document library. This is that site change service again. So this is managing that stuff in our extra library that we have. So anyway, I'm gonna go past this. This is just, there's a lot of SharePoint code going on here basically to do that. You can see here we've got basically we're just navigating down, we get to that list, and then we basically just pull in these items, these SP files, and we just do an update. So yeah, just pretty straightforward SharePoint stuff. And then there's also a log file that's up in the log file is also put into a list as well. So we've got instead of going to the event viewer, which would be maybe a good place, maybe not. And this is happening on a farm, so I think putting it in a SharePoint list makes a lot of sense. And that's exactly what they're doing here. So they've collected all of the log information, and now it's going to get dumped up into just another document library. So in fact, we should be able to see what that library name is just for fun. It's called DM import. So we'll take a look at that when this is done. And it's basically just dumping all that stuff up in that doc library. So now we're done. So that's deactivate. Let me go into the list here and see if we can find those. There's DM import. So you can see here, this is the logging information I was just talking about. So it just throws stuff. Just throws basically a log. This is our log information. It's in a list. That's what was going on there. That last little bit you saw. Here's the product, the PDPs. So these are all the PDPs we just imported. You see they're all new. So that's what was going on there with that site service. So that's pretty good. I think I'm gonna just assume that you can sort of gather what's going to happen on the deactivate side, because it's the exact opposite. And we got a half hour left to cover the best of the three, most interesting maybe. So let's go back here. Okay, so our final, the last of the three solution starters that we're going to cover today is the EPT association tool. And as you've gathered probably by now, this is sort of the third piece of this three-piece puzzle that allows us to sort of manage our whole EPT process. So this tool kind of fills in a gap. It allows us to visually set up the relationships between all of our demand management entities. So in the case of a workflow controlled EPT, it allows us to also document that, even though it's not really being pulled directly from the workflow DLLs, we can still represent it here, and then we get some advantages. So this is a nice tool, and I'll show you how this was done. There's some other great things in here in terms of developer highlights. So they do a ribbon customization. They also modify the server settings page, which for me, I was always kind of wondered how would be the best way to do that. And they do it in a pretty cool way. I'll show you. So if you ever want to add some additional menu items on that server settings page to go do custom things, there's good code in there to show you how to do it. And then there's also the normal, PSI and SharePoint activities that are going on. So this is a great piece of sample code. So let's switch back over down there and step into that guy. So the first thing we need to do, let's go to, I believe I have a fresh instance here. I want to show you the installation here. So this is just the SharePoint feature as well that we can just easily install, and it's going to get put here on the server settings page. So you can see it has not been installed here. Normally it's going to be right below the project workflow settings. So let's go ahead and see if we can install that guy. Let me navigate over to my deployment PowerShell script. And that should be here. So here's our PowerShell that deploys this guy, and this is more, this isn't doing anything on the fly like the previous one. This is pretty much a standard sort of installation. You can see here that this actually passes in the arguments. So this is a much more generic piece of PowerShell. I'm trying to actually see which one of these I use to call this. Let's see, what do they do here? There we go. So we'll just change this. We're going to go project. And we'll put it into PWA. Oh, we better put it in PWA. Actually, I think it's already, take it back. We'll do the deployment here anyway. Let's try it. So this batch file is basically just taking those parameters, passing them into the PowerShell script that I just showed you, and it's going to just basically do the standard sort of deactivating and retracting, and then it's going to basically do the install and activating stuff in this batch file. So that's an interesting thing. Again, a great piece of sample code if you want to see how to easily deploy and install things with PowerShell. This is a good sample. So this is going to put it into PWA2. I don't know what it's taking a minute here. I think I'm just going to keep moving anyway. I'll show you this, what it looks like in, it should be here in our PWA. It should already be deployed. So if we go to server settings, oh, I think we just did a reset. There it goes. So you can see here we're adding and deploying the solution and we're activating it. So we don't have to go through and go into site settings and activate it like we did on the previous one. This is just going to be there and ready for us, assuming this finishes here. Okay, we're done. Let's see, hopefully this is going to come back now. That'll take a second to refresh. So what we should see now, if we go under server settings, we will see that new menu item that says EPT Association Tool, and then it'll link us off to just basically a custom page, and from there we can do all of our cool stuff with this tool. Let's see, there it is. So you see the extra link we have. We go ahead into the tool, and this is going to throw us off to a new custom page that has our grid. So we're here. You can see we have a custom ribbon, and I'll show you how that's done. And these are sort of empty looking at the moment because we need to first at least either create a new EPT or select one. So let's select one first. Let's go ahead and pick the new one that I just brought in. Oh, and I meant to mention I have an assertion happening here that was going to be annoying, but I didn't have time to look into what's causing it. And anyway, I'm just going to have to click through some code. So, at any rate, this is what the association tool does, and this is sort of the power of it. So we have our EPT. I can see what phases I have associated with it. You can see here create and select. I have these stages that I've set for each phase, and then I have the PDPs, and then even below that I have the web parts that are associated with that PDP. So another cool thing, especially from a developer's perspective, I'll go through some of the stuff here in the menu quickly before we get into the code. I can check this box and it'll show me, you notice it just put all the GUIDs for these different entities over on the right-hand column. That's really important because when you're building a workflow in Visual Studio that you're going to associate with these entities, the way you tie them together is in the workflow activity, you have to actually reference these GUIDs. So before we had this tool, you had to sort of go into server settings and then navigate down and find the particular entity and go get its GUID and then come back and then navigate to the next one. It took a lot of time. This tool right now, as you can see, all the GUIDs are here and I can see whatever I need to see. So this is really going to save a lot of time for developers. Did a checkbox here, show all web parts. So there are some additional like title web parts and other things that show up that are normally filtered here, but you can see absolutely everything that's in the PDP. I've got to go through all these assertions. So you can see here now we've got like image viewer web parts. So it shows everything. So you can see all the web parts that are associated. And then if you expand the web part, you can see what the custom fields are. So You've got all the GUIDs for those as well, because you also need to reference those over in the workflow side if you're doing stuff in Visual Studio. So assuming you don't have this assertion, this is save a lot of time. So all right, that's gone. So that's kind of how you select an existing EPT. You have these options to display other interesting data. If I go out and make changes, I come back, I hit the refresh, it's going to refresh this thing, which I'm not going to do because I'll have to click a bunch of buttons. I can also change the outline level. So let's say I want this to just go back to sort of the very highest level. I click outline 1, and it's basically just going to collapse. It's just collapsing the tree in our grid here. So this is just an easy way to expand or contract things. I can also reorder things. So if I click reorder, I get a custom dialog up, and now I can change the order of either my phases or my stages within the phase. So this is a way of using these drop downs to reorder stuff in the order that they show up here in my list, which is nice. And then I can also edit my EPT, and this just throws me back to this is using a standard admin page that allows me to go ahead and change information about an EPT file. So I'll just leave that be. And then finally, I can create a new EPT, and this also uses the standard admin page just for adding an EPT that you normally have in server settings. So we'll say no workflow here. We'll pick a PDP, and that's good enough probably. So now if I go back here, actually I have to do a refresh first. Now if I go to my select, I should see the new one here is Mike latest. So there it is, it showed up. And I wanted to show you a couple other things here. You can also right-click on all these entities to make the changes as well. So you can see here that I can also edit the EPT from this menu. I can also change it to workflow controlled, which I'll do. And I just want to show you what happens if I do that. So that basically sets a flag and tells me, hey, this thing's now workflow controlled. It's going to be tied to some workflow DLL that I can't see into. So it clears all the other stuff below the EPT. Now I can add stuff back. Then that's not going to get pushed off. That's not really going to change anything. It's just more of a way to document it here. It gets stored in the list, and I'll show you that in a minute. But now I could basically go in here and I can add an existing phase because I know I'm going to be using some stage in that phase for my workflow. So let's just say create. And I'll add another phase. Let's go with manage. Okay, so I've got 2 phases there now. And then the important one is now I can start to add stages. And these are going to be, this is where I actually tie into, this will actually tie into the workflow with the GUIDs from the stages. So I'll just pick one of these. Let's just add one more here. Yeah, we'll pick that one. And so now you can see, just use the outline. We'll open this guy up. I click a bunch of times. So you can see here with relatively little work, I just built all this association for this workflow controlled EPT that I just made. So I wanted to show you these lists, and then we're going to go into the code. Okay. So let's go over to the list. I wanted to show you a couple of these lists that this can use to sort of internally. It's nothing you have to worry about or manage, but this is the association list. And you can see here that this is the thing, when you set up the relationships in the tool, it's basically tracking them over here with between EPT, the phase, the stage, ordering and that sort of information. The other information is in the PSI, so we don't have to worry, but the relationship between EPTs, phases, and stages is not, and so we have to track it here in this list. So these are the lists. This is the list that is used also by you saw over in the bulk, not bulk export, in the VM export tool. When I selected my new EPT and it knew that it was associated with some phases and stages, it got that information from this list. So that's why I was checking to see if the tool is installed. The other interesting one here is this EPT data, and this basically stores information. When I have an EPT that is non-workflow controlled and I then change it to be workflow controlled, you can see here this is the place where I store that because there's nowhere else to store it. It's not something that's stored off in the PSI, so we store it in this list. So you can see when I've done that some changes here, it stores that this thing is now workflow controlled and it knows that piece of data. So those two lists are sort of managed for you. We're going to get to those in a minute. So let's swing over into the tool, run through the code. There's actually quite a bit of it here, and then we'll do a quick run through the code and the debugger. We only have 15 minutes left. So let's start off with the data scheme. So these are just some data types, some SharePoint data types that we need to build as part of the feature. So this is the content type that's used in that association list. We've also got the list definition here for that list. I mean, if you look at this XML, you'll see here's the name of the list. So what happens is when this feature is installed, this list is created for us automatically by way of this content type, this definition, and this list instance. If you look at this XML file, this is where we actually tell SharePoint that we need to create this list. And in fact, you can even control things here, like if you want it on the quick launch bar or not, which we really don't because it's not something you normally would even look at anyway. It's sort of a hidden thing. Here's the other list, the EPT data list that I showed you, the second one. Again, it has a content type, it has a list definition, and then here's the instance, same deal, and there's the list name. So this stuff's all getting created for us automatically when we install the feature, which is kind of nice. The DTO folder, these are data model classes, but they're not used anywhere. So I left them in this project because I didn't write the code in the first place. I don't know what the use was, but anyway, don't worry about them. They're not used. The event handlers folder, this is a good one. So we've got four files in here. We've got this PS event handler info attributes file. So this defines metadata for event handlers. It's basically, there's this metadata that's attached to the event handler methods so that when we load them up, we go out and look at that metadata to make sure that we've got the right event handler. That's sort of, I guess, what you would say it's used for. So you can see we're just creating this attribute. And the next one here is this event handler's infos collector. This returns metadata info about the event handler. So this is basically used to go out and get this handler info, right? So we can call this and get back to this method info, which includes that attribute information. Then there's also the event receiver attribute. So that's actually on the class that we implement to so there's an attribute both at the class level and the method level, and that's what these two attribute classes define. And then the info collector really just helps us retrieve some reflection information. And then here's the actual event receiver. So these are basically 4 events that get installed when the feature is installed. And these, you can see here, these are the actual attributes that I was talking about. So here's the event receiver attribute that has to be on the receiver class. And then each method has to have the event handler info attributes with a GUID. So that's how they get identified when they're loaded. But anyway, the important thing here is you can see that these are the 4 events that we care about. So when EPTs are deleted, when a workflow phase is deleted, when a stage is deleted, or when a stage is updated, we get basically these events fire off over on the server side. And then these services are then used to go ahead and remove records that we don't need, depending on what the record is we'll just leave it at that for the time being. But I'll show you how that works if we have time. JS Grid. We got two files. This is this adapter code file. This basically builds custom data table containing information about EPTs. So it's just sort of a data collection mechanism that's used to get information on this EPT stuff. So it just builds this table, loads it up, and passes stuff back. Now we've got some good utilities in here. These are just static methods to get information about our grid. So it can go out and give me like the columns and the fields and stuff like that. And the serializer, when we do serialization, because the grid's in JavaScript, we have to serialize it off of JSON. So we need some information about this grid, and this is where we get the information just from these methods here. So that's all that's for. Let's go into layouts. In the EPT Association Tool folder, you see all these ASPX files. Those are all the custom dialogues that pop up for the various things. You saw that when we did things like reordering or when we were adding stuff, we'd have these dialogues pop up, and that's basically, those are defined here with these ASPX files. Down at the include folder, these are some of the JavaScript pieces of code that we use to implement stuff. So this one, the Association Grid Controller, these have ribbon button handlers. So you can see here that at the low level, when the ribbon button gets pressed, you'll get certain commands sent in, and then they get sort of routed through this JavaScript code. This is an interesting one that you should take a look at. This is the Association Page Link Handler. So what happens is every time the page changes, as you can see up here in the top of the code, it looks to see if it's the admin page. If it is, then it calls this try insert link, and it goes down and sort of navigates through the hierarchy of objects on the page and inserts this, basically the menu item right here, into the HTML, and then it sets up this link that goes off to our custom page that we've installed. So that's how they set that up. This is cool. If you want to do any other customizations over there, this is an awesome example. Page component. So this is the thing that just sort of handles the display of those dialogues that we're talking about. You can just see a lot of the functions here. Here's the sort of the main function, the pop-up dialogue. So anyway, that's what goes on in that one. And then this has some additional functions to do the reordering in the grid when we reorder stuff. This is the thing that shuffles things around for us. So that's just a quick run through their styles. I don't think we need to worry about. What do we have next here? Yeah, so there's some other things going on here in this, like this ribbon manager one. This is one where we load up and associate some JavaScript and associate it with certain pages and do some initialization. So not a whole lot happening in there. Let's go on. This is our page link element. So this is actually where that page link gets set up for us when we install a feature. It's a pretty tiny little piece of code, but anyway, this points off to that JavaScript file that does the menu item for us. And then here's our ribbon customization. I went through this on our call on Tuesday, and I don't know if anybody missed it, but I don't have time right now to do this one. But basically, this elements file is where declaratively you can customize your ribbon. So all the buttons that you saw customized on those ribbons above the screens here are basically declared here. You can see here, here's reorder. Let's see what else we have. That's the flyout stuff. There's some other buttons in here. Basically, all the buttons that you see that show up on that ribbon and all the flyouts and all the other things, they're all just declared in this XML file. So if you want to do any customization, you just need to look at this and change it. And this is documented in the SDK, so have a look at that. So that's kind of the basic stuff up at the tool level. And then we've got another library similar to a lot of the other projects. So down here in this one, we have this association data file, and this is just the data storage class for association data. This next one, association data context, this is just sort of another container that holds data for both the association data and the EPT data, the SharePoint list. This next one is data storage used to pass filter values. It's just another container. The data service, this is sort of a high-level functionality to manage association data. This EPT one, this is another data storage class for EPT data. There's not much there. It just gets passed around, instantiated and passed around. And then this is our EPT data service. And this is sort of a high-level manager for doing things with EPT data. And then this one here, this does some things that helps us manage our EPT lists that you saw, the two custom lists that we have. There's just some management functions in here. Now we're down into the model folder, and these are all just sort of generic containers. So as some of the other solution starters, I mentioned that we get data back sort of in different disparate ways. So for instance, we'll get PSI calls will return us data sets, different data sets. So we'll have one data set with EPTs, one data set with custom fields, one with lookup tables, another one with project fields, and then we get back a list of PDPs that's in another format. And so what happens is we have these generic data containers here under model that basically sort of normalize those pieces of data, and we just store those in generic lists instead of passing around data sets that not everything knows about. So that's what the models are for. Those are just data containers. And then we've got, again, our services folder, which is sort of another common pattern here. We've got all the interface files, and then we've got the services. These are more of the low-level implementation. So we've got sort of custom field service, and we've got custom field web service, and custom field service is the high-level guy that uses this low-level custom field web service. We've got the events PSI that's managed in this service, and those are all the eventing PSIs where we basically install the event handlers that I showed you earlier. Those four methods. That's what's done in this service. The log service just logs our error messages or our status messages. Session service. This is just really not even much to it, but it just configures or gives us back, formats our URLs for accessing our web services. The SharePoint service, this wraps all the SharePoint list APIs for all the low-level stuff we're doing with PDPs. That's what's happening here. This service basically wraps our view service, the PSI web service. This is a new service, but this is basically used to go out and get certain information about project fields. And then finally, our PSI workflow service is wrapped down here with this service. This is, you can see right here, we're calling, these are basically workflow PSI calls that are wrapped in that service. So that's all the good stuff there in services like normal. A couple other little ones here. Let's see, the association context. This just stores some association data. I mean, it's just sort of our mega container that holds all the information in one place, sort of a top-level pointer, if you will. This next one, EPT association tool feature. This is just that piece of code that's used to set the flag that basically these properties that tell us that the tool is installed, and this is so that we can. This is basically done so that we can know in the export tool if the tool is there. That's what this is for. And then finally, the PSICF, this retrieves all the hierarchical data for a single EPT. So you can see here, these are just high-level functions to get EPT phases, get the EPT itself, et cetera. So that's what goes on in that guy. Let's walk through in the code. We've only got a few minutes left here. Let me just enable the breakpoint. And let's go ahead and run. And really not going to have time to walk through this. I think we got 3 minutes left. So it's basically out there retracting. You can see down at the bottom it's retracting, and it's going to push out the solution here from Visual Studio. I think at this point I'm just going to return it. We're just not going to have time to go through the debugger. But let me just say I encourage you to go up to the links. We're going to show you the links here on the slide. Go up and download these things. These are great pieces of sample code that really do some cool things that you can leverage to do lots of other cool things for your customers or in your organization to customize, project and even SharePoint. So these are some of the resource URLs, and this first one, this is appointed to Code Gallery, where you can get the Solution Starter code that you've seen today, and also there's a deployment for binaries only, and there'll also be some documentation pushed up there in the next week or so as well. And any other modifications we have to the code will be pushed up there, but that's a good starting point for all this stuff that you're seeing today. There's also some other webcasts here that are more functional that were done a week or two ago. So those are great resources. And then the other normal project server resources are here at these URLs. So let me hand it back to Heather for the survey, I believe.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. I will mention that if you do have any questions for Mike, you can go ahead and submit those now using the Q&A pane, and we can give you some quick answers if you do have any questions. There's none pending at this time. So I will go ahead and put up our survey for today. You should be seeing that showing up in your slide area. If you could just take a moment to fill it out before you log off, we do appreciate your feedback. All you need to do is follow the links provided to complete the evaluation, either registered online, or if you got the link some other way, you can click on the All Other Registrants link. And with that, Mike, it looks like we don't have any questions. Do you have any final words to wrap up?
Just a thank you to everyone for participating and watching the webcast. And please, again, go download the code and have fun with it. And it's great code, so thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. And also one final reminder, you can print a PDF copy of the slide deck by clicking the printer icon in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. That's a good way to get all of those resources. And this concludes today's NSDN webcast. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you for part 3.